In this video blog today, I'm going to present again a paper that I already gave at an international symposium towards measuring the public value of research in the humanities. That was given on the 30th of May 2012 at the e-Humanities Research Institute in Amsterdam. The argument that I want to make today is that the way that the public value of humanities in England has been thought about, and in the UK, has been closely tied to a particular agenda of the government, the impact agenda. The arts and humanities research funders have also been strongly driven by this agenda. They've done so because they've taken that agenda as being central to their existence. Proving impact for them has become about proving professionalisation. And this has exposed humanities in the UK to a set of pressures with which they have not been entirely comfortable. But at the same time, the way the process has unfolded has at least permitted a sensible expression of what impact might be in arts and humanities research in the UK. So there are two backgrounds to this presentation, both very specific to the British case. The first is that there isn't a strong culture of funding humanities in the UK. In a sense, it's because there is a fear within administrators that humanities research is somehow not worthy. The slide shows a hypothetical quotation from a sceptical or cynical civil servant. But this really encapsulates the fears of arts and humanities research funders, that their research is seen by others as being somehow frivolous and luxurious. So behind this story I tell today is a fear that has driven the community, a fear that has driven them into an existential struggle to secure the place of their disciplines. And the second element of this is the fact that the central figure to this story, the Arts and Humanities Research Council, is neither the most powerful or the most influential actor in the tale. The most powerful actor is the Higher Education Funding Council for England, whose policies and whose funding allocations drive the pattern of higher education in England, but also greatly influence what other funding councils do in Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland. So this means that the group who are most influential, the universities, have become highly attuned to responding to HEFC's needs, and in particular, making sure that they get the best returns out of a system that's primarily driven by formulae. So change in England has effectively seen the creation of a set of administrative, bureaucratic systems, with universities trying to make sure they can secure the best slice of whatever pie is available. Now, to frame the story, you have to understand the place of humanities in British and English universities. Divide them into four types of university. The ancient universities were originally created as humanities universities. As the Industrial Revolution took off, these universities were resolutely opposed to developing new courses and new departments to encompass new engineering and technology disciplines. And today, humanities remain symbolically and materially important to them. Now, in response to the failure of the ancient universities to adapt, in the 19th and 20th centuries, a new breed of civic institution emerged, often part funded by industrialists or by public subscription, with an emphasis on the technical faculties. But at the same time, these universities also built up their humanities faculties, partly about administering a new mass administrative as well as technical class, but also as part of the idea of being universities, still strongly shaped by what the ancient institutions did. And then throughout the expansion of higher education in the UK, the creation of colleges of advanced technology, the plate glass universities, the incorporation of the polytechnics, humanities remained an important part of what it meant to be a university. And in the last 15 years, we've seen former technical institutes embrace the humanities as part of their justification for university title. Now, alongside the universities, there's one other group that really participate in research publicly funded, and that's the cultural sector. This is a list of organisations who are eligible to receive Research Council funding for research. And the characteristic of them all, with one exception, is that they are national landmark cultural organisations, with the exception of the Young Foundation, which is a think tank that undertakes research on social and cultural inclusion. So when one talks about arts and humanities research in the UK, one is talking primarily about the university sector, certainly for basic research, although applied research and development is undertaken in the cultural and creative sectors. What there isn't is a cohesive, well-defined innovation system in the humanities, creating a strong demand on universities or giving humanities scholars a clear set of steers and pressures from users for their research to follow. So, going back to this idea of humanities funding in Britain, until the late 1990s, there wasn't even a research council for humanities in the UK. Government funding was provided parsimoniously through the British Academy. Then, in 1997, the influential Deering Report on the Future of Higher Education recommended creating a separate research council for arts and humanities, seeing it as being having different needs from the sciences on the one hand and social sciences on the other. And then, in response, in 1998, as a first step, an Arts and Humanities Research Board was created, primarily from the previous infrastructure, the British Academy, and created as a board because of its limited capacity, with a promise that if it succeeded as a board, then it would become a full research council in its own right, which duly happened in 2005. It became a research council, it joined Research Councils UK, and effectively demonstrated a commitment to behaving as the other research councils did. This behaving as other research councils do is important because in the same period we see the idea of impact becoming important to the way that the research policy environment of the UK functions. In 1981, the Conservative government imposed a 14% cut on higher education in cash terms, and a consistent reduction in funding per student that saw the net per capita funding fall by 50% over the following 17 years. And universities responded to this pressure by cutting all non-essential spending, reducing their capital spending, and cross-subsidising their work heavily, often using consultancy and third-stream income to cover shortfalls of public funding. This situation was reversed in 2001, when in the Science White Paper, the government committed itself to reversing this shortfall in return for a promise that universities would create a concomitant set of societal benefits in return for the additional investment. So, and universities were given the chance to have 20 years to demonstrate these benefits would emerge. But of course, if they created benefits in 20 years, the argument was within 10 years, they would already be visible, and then in 5 years, you would have to start creating measuring systems so that if you could see what was starting to emerge by 2010. And the government have been very good in keeping to their side of their deal. In the spending reviews of 2007 and 2010, which reduced the rate of growth and actually decelerated public spending, science funding was ring-fenced and protected from cuts. However, from 2005, the government has also been urging the sector to start measuring its impacts in order to demonstrate in due course that it's fulfilling its side of the bargain. And so this is where we start to see research impact becoming a meaningful part of research policy. Since 1986, the UK has measured the value of its research through the research assessment exercise. What originally started as quite a light-touch gentleman's agreement has evolved into a very divisive, competitive, allocative mechanism, with universities spending considerable sums of real and in-kind resources optimizing their submissions. In parallel with the assessment of research, in 2002, the Funding Council trialled the launch of what it then called the Higher Education Business Interaction Survey. This would later turn into a substantive return covering all elements of universities' societal engagement. The returns that universities give are then used to allocate the third stream of funding, Higher Education Innovation Fund. In 2005, all the research councils started to systematically promoting knowledge transfer activities. Things like small grants and fellowships for knowledge transfer, research into how knowledge transfer actually works, industrial partnerships, business plans, competitions, all things that the Science and Technology Research Councils had pioneered, but they were enthusiastically embraced by the other research councils, including the Arts and Humanities one. In 2006, the government announced that because of the bureaucracy around the RAE, that would be the last assessment exercise, and it would be replaced by a light-touch, metrics-driven exercise, the Research Excellence Framework. And then in 2009, we see, for the first time really, the emergence in discussions about what would replace the the Research Assessment Exercise, the idea of impact, something that seems to make academics sometimes a little bit uncomfortable. And impact, it was decided, was going to be an important part of the 2014 REF and the way that resources are allocated. So, in this process, what we see is that impact was defined in very broad terms. A distinction was made between, on the one hand, academic and economic and social impacts, but also within economic and social impacts, it's interesting that the social was as broadly defined as the economic. So in the diagram that the research councils used to define the impact of research, we see words like culture, well-being, welfare, societal issues, quality of life used alongside words such as wealth creation, prosperity, R&D investment, much harder economistic words. So clearly the government has a broad view of the idea of impact. And so as the idea of impact has emerged, it's clear humanities is not being forced, slave-like, to follow a model developed for measuring other research areas, but it's something with which it could potentially feel comfortable. Now that framework is used to measure the results of projects after they have been completed, and also for people bidding for funding to say how they will deliver impact. The idea of impact also emerges in the REF. In the end, plans for a light-touch, metrics-driven REF came to nothing because the metrics are simply not available. But what did stay was the bureaucracy. A bureaucratic system for measuring impact and allocating funding, of which impact was going to be a critically important element. As the slide shows, 20% of funding, or 20% of the profile, will be awarded on the basis of the impact that departments create in their research. Impact in terms of the reach and significance of their research. Every department in the UK being given a profile on the basis of the percentage of its impact that corresponds to the various starred levels. Now, the way that this will be done is that there is a set of peer review panels that oversee this whole process. And under them sit departmental level sub-panels. And there are 4 overarching panels covering life sciences, the technology, engineering and mathematics, the social sciences and humanities. And each of those broad panels is able to come up with its own methods for assessing research against a set of generic criteria. And then the sub-panels assess the individual departments against those criteria. And this is what the panel D, for arts and humanities came up with, an indicative list of impacts that could potentially be used for assessing impact. Now, I want to stand aside a point very briefly that is regularly and correctly made, that this kind of administrative exercise is intellectually and logically bankrupt. If one looks beyond that point and actually looks at the list of the kind of impacts that can be taken into consideration, this doesn't seem out of step with the kind of claims that arts and humanities researchers make about the impact that they have on society and the value of their research. Some of the criteria even manage to avoid the Whiggish assumptions that are sometimes made that all university contributions are positive. So there is a value here to challenging cultural values and assumptions that can be sometimes uncomfortable and lead to a kind of constructive struggle in society. So one analysis of this, the work of Panel D in this area, is that this is a reasonable attempt to reduce into bureaucratic terms what arts and humanities researchers actually do. Now, inevitably, it's partial, it's reductionist, it's bureaucratic, but it's a bureaucratic reductionist list. At least there is a chain evident here from what humanities scholars are doing and say is important to them, to the evaluative criteria chosen. coming out of the work that the Research Council put into understanding impact. So how can we make sense of the various rows that have broken out in the arts and humanities community in recent years about the idea of impact? Now, the most significant of these was a row about the inclusion of the notion of the big society in a formal plan of the Research Council, its delivery plan, saying that this is something that would be promoted by humanities research. Now, the big society concept or idea is something strongly associated with one party in the government coalition. Very quickly built up a campaign that attracted thousands of followers via an electronic petition and coordinated the resignation of a number of members of the Reviewer College of the Research Council. And it very quickly became conflated with the resistance to the bureaucratic methods associated with the REF. It almost became a cause célèbre for academics, tired of the intrusion of departments into their research, micromanaging them in its attempt to maximize the amount of income that they received. This brings us back to the point at the start of the presentation. What Arts and Humanities Research Council seem to have done in this process is to at least participate in something irresistible. The Treasury want to know where their money has gone, and they will find out. And actually incorporate some important features of arts and humanities research, such as the mechanisms by which humanities research has an impact into that process. And there was always a battle that was unwinnable for arts and humanities, saying that teaching is important for impact, because that was simply bureaucratically impossible, because it's a research evaluation. But the point is that the Arts and Humanities Research Council has not behaved entirely instrumentally. Unspoken within this is a belief within government that the research in universities should be concentrated in fewer, larger activities. The concentration pressure from government means that universities are fighting an existential battle to fall on one side of the divide or the other. Are they excellent or not? So impact for them has become part of that broader battle. They're much less concerned with what the content of impact actually concerns. They don't care whether the impact studies they submit have robustness or validity. What they care about is being rated as well as their competitors. What they care about is the percentage of their activities rated as 4-star. This, for me, seems to be quite a worrying situation, and those concerned with the situation in the UK would do better to look at this than to criticise the Research Council. The principal actors involved with the arts and humanities innovation system don't really seem concerned with generating impact. What they want to do is create results in a bureaucratic logic, but that logic may shift at any point in time, whilst what the cultural community of the UK actually requires remains reasonably constant. Impact is almost a byproduct of the bureaucratic system, despite almost every actor being willing to say that research has to be socially useful. And this seems to be the real problem for the system, the fact that it doesn't systematically promote impact, only impact studies. So what I want to argue is that this is an interesting case study of how incentivization and new public management, in parallel with something particular to higher education, the creep of the language of excellence, can actually work against the interests of all concerned. You can have a system that doesn't want to produce the outcomes it's supposed to produce. All actors are working systematically against the stated policy intentions and interests. And that is something that I think should be a concern for policymakers, but also an object of interest for academics. Thank you very much.